Today on the Big 6 in 60, the Raiders are set to hire Klint Kubiak as head coach.
Klint Kubiak wants to coach the Raiders, and they want him to be their head coach.
The Knicks take down the Lakers in the Garden.
Consistently turning plays that should not be transitioned into layups.
And Illinois wins a top 10 matchup against Nebraska.
Keaton Walker shows up in the second half. In the second half, he scored 23 points.
This is the Big 6 in 60, the 6 biggest national sports stories from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now. Thank you for making the Big 6 in 60 your first listen of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. The Raiders are still the last team without a head coach after this offseason's coaching cycle, but Vegas has reportedly zeroed in on Klint Kubiak for the job. While we wait for an official word, your boy Q with Locked On Raiders tells us more.
There was at one point 10 head coaching vacancies. Now there appears to be none. And again, the Raiders cannot seal the deal and get the contract signed with Klint Kubiak until after the Super Bowl is over and wrapped up. So February 9th is when we can start to look for that. But based off what happened over the weekend, the Arizona Cardinals, as a matter of fact, they hired Mike LaFleur, who was one of the guys that the Raiders had talked to. That was the offensive coordinator for the Rams. They hired him on Sunday officially. After word started to roll out on Sunday that the Raiders' interview with Kubiak went really well and that the Raiders are in position to get their next quarterback, or head coach, I should say. As a matter of fact, Adam Schefter put out sources. After meeting Saturday with Las Vegas and Arizona, Seahawks offensive coordinator Klint Kubiak intends to try to work out a deal to become the next head coach of the Raiders. No deal can be finalized until after the Super Bowl, but Klint Kubiak wants to coach the Raiders, and they want him to be their head coach. Now it's only a matter of time before the two sides can formalize a deal. So, again, we know that it can't be set in stone. It cannot be finalized right now. It cannot be finalized until after the Super Bowl is over, but it's about as close to official as it could possibly be. Now, we know that there's, scenarios that have popped up in the past with, coaches like Josh McDaniels, coaches with Ben Johnson, who was on his way to Washington. Then he got, turned around and decided to go back to Detroit. Anything can happen. We remember Cliff Kingsbury not too long ago, a couple seasons ago, when he was supposed to be the offensive coordinator for Antonio Pierce, and then he decided not to. So anything can happen in between now and then. We've documented that really well. But as long as Klint Kubiak wants to be a head football coach, he's going to be the head football coach of the Silver and Black. Jeremy Fowler from ESPN tweeted out, the Raiders front office has begun notifying the rest of the field that they've been eliminated as the team has made its decision on head coach. Carolina defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero was considered the number 2 in the equation behind Kubiak. Team was pretty zeroed in on a going offensive. So, again, it makes all the sense in the world knowing what the Raiders are in position of, knowing that they have a chance to bring in Fernando Mendoza as the number 1 overall pick. Why not get a young offensive-minded guy that can grow with that quarterback and give this team an opportunity? But it's funny, man. It's the week of Super Bowl, 60. We're here in the Bay. The Raiders so many times, aren't really talked about that much this week, and I guarantee that they're going to be a subject of a lot of conversations. I guarantee I'll have a bunch of interview requests that I'll be doing that people want to talk about the Silver and Black. If they want to talk about the Raiders, want to talk about the direction that they're going. Matter of fact, Sunday night, as soon as the news broke out, I had a couple requests already that night. Hey, Q, can you jump on for a few minutes, to talk to John Lund on Westwood One Sports, or can you talk to this guy, to talk about the Raiders and Klint Kubiak? Like, there's a big buzz around the Raiders, which is awesome based off Klint Kubiak. And, look what he's doing with that offense there in Seattle, and just the way that he's aligned up players and put them in position like Jackson Smith and Jigba, a guy that is always going to be double-teamed and triple-teamed, just like Brock Bowers would be, but yet he schemes them up, puts them in position, so when he is out there, in formation and trying to go and make plays, he's able to get open and not have that kind of coverage and be basically hampered like, most big-time receivers. Like we see Brock Bowers all the time, right? We see Brock Bowers all the time get doubled and triple-teamed, and they're not going to allow this guy to break them and beat them. And Klint Kubiak is really good with scheme. Obviously, he comes from a very long lineage of NFL coaching experience when it comes to the Kubiaks. Gary Kubiak, obviously, is his famous father, multiple-time Super Bowl champ. So, I don't have to go in on that. But it's an exciting time. It's a nice buzz. It's great to have a good buzz around this team where there hasn't been. Most of the time it's doom and gloom, and, people all walk around here at the Moscone Center or wherever we are on the road at Media Row, and they're like, man, what are you going to do with those Raiders, man? What are the Raiders going to do? What's going on with them? And it's always a lot of negativity, but now there's a nice little buzz. And as I mentioned, this is the calm before the storm, before this, really gets ramped up here. But there's already a nice little buzz. And, everyone I run into, hey, man, that's going to be a good hire, man. Kubiak, that's a good hire. And you got the number 1 overall pick and got some salary cap space. And, again, nobody thinking that this team is going to go and all of a sudden go from being a 3-win team to being a 13-win team. But there's some positivity, there's some hope, and I think that that's the most important thing, some hope with Klint Kubiak and what he brings to the table if, in fact, they do go ahead and get that seal the deal. And, again, you could talk about it. We could say it's about as close to done as possible, but until it's actually official like a referee's whistle, you know that there is still a slight chance that it doesn't happen. But I do feel really good about that. If you're into these type of things, check it out on Twitter. AFL Godfather pretty much said if Klint Kubiak's not the coach of the Raiders in 2026, he's going to suspend his account till 2027. And I've been very adamant that AFL Godfather is inside the building with the Raiders. So, I mean, if anyone's going to know, it's him. But, again, like I said, unless something just were to come up that's unfortunate, unforeseen, that all of a sudden Kubiak gets cold feet, it's his job for the foreseeable future, and hopefully it's going to be a long future, and the Raiders can close this rotating door of potential head coaches.
It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff. The final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season is officially coming to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
Welcome back to the Big 6 and 60. The Vikings fired general manager Kwesi Adofo-Mensah over the weekend after Minnesota missed the playoffs this season and watched former QB Sam Darnold make the Super Bowl. Luke Braun tells us where Minnesota goes from here on Locked On Vikings.
Boy, it's been a weekend. If you missed the emergency episode, we went live when Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was fired. But if you are just a Monday through Friday listener, then there's that. Kwesi was fired. I did my instant reaction on an emergency episode that went up Friday, shortly after the normal Friday episode, which is about free agents or whatever. No, it was about Malik Willis with Peter Bukowski. Also, fire. Don't miss that. But now that some other stuff is coming out, we have a number of these sort of tell-all articles from everybody who has been kind of everybody on the Vikings beat. There's one from Star Tribune, one from ESPN with Kevin Seifert, one from Matthew Collar, one from The Athletic, which is Alec Lewis and a Diana Rossini double byline, and some of the national stuff too. So when you compile all of this, a story starts to emerge, but that story doesn't add up. And that is what I am here to do today, to tell that story best I know. I am not a reporter. None of this is my original reporting. It is all compiled from the original reporting that's been posted this weekend. But I want to put it together and then start to ask the logical questions that follow up. Something feels weird. Something doesn't add up. And honestly, if the answer was, or if the way this went down was Black Monday, Kwesi was fired, everybody comes up in front of the podium, they point to the 2022 draft and the QB fiasco they're going through now, I don't think anybody would think twice. I get it. It's probably not where I would have been at the time, but I certainly understand. And I probably wouldn't spend a lot of time railing on it or anything. I'm not going to do that today. I get it. A lot of things went wrong, and with some of the stuff that's come out, it feels like they had to make this decision. Like it's at least justified in that way. It's just that the timeline is very weird. Why January 30th? That is not a time when anyone does this. And in fact, in Diana Rossini's and Alec Lewis's piece, there is a source that is an agent that was working with Kwesi like the day before on a contract thing, an agent for a Vikings player, with a contract situation that needed discussing, and was discussing that like at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama the day before, who then went, wait, what? I just said stuff to him. What now does this matter? And there is a sort of a runoff effect to that. Like people don't like having the rug pulled out from them like that. And whatever Kwesi said to him clearly doesn't matter now. And now the negotiation is that much further back. And it might be fine. They might still get that thing done the way that they wanted to, but it's going to put a wrench in a lot of things in that way. So what I want to do first is just try to tell, the 4-year story. I did it on the Emergency podcast where I talked about the story of like transactions. Well, here was this, this first draft that went poorly, but the season went well. And then this next draft went a little better, but the season went worse. It's so on and so forth, right? And here's what they did at quarterback. But the insider story is a lot different, right? These are people that are actual journalists with sources that are now kind of dumping the news, that the info that they maybe have been sitting on for a while, or info that's now just people are now more willing to share because Kwesi is out. So I want to start with that story. And in those stories, there are a lot of these little anecdotes that give us new information we didn't know before. We know new details about how the Thielen trade came to be in this last offseason. We know new details about how the organization reacted to the TJ Hawkinson trade, and how the dynamics in the building, there was, quote unquote, underlying tension, which was sort of thrown out there kind of willy-nilly and hinted at and wink, wink, nudge, nudged at, but we know a little more about that too. And then I want to talk about the timeline of the firing itself, the decision of why to move on from Kwesi Adofo-Mensah less than a calendar year after extending him. There's a lot of whiplash in that, and the way it went down day by day, it implies that there is still something we don't know. So that's what we're going to do. So when Kwesi was hired, he basically immediately struggled. The first thing that the organization had to deal with was Kirk Cousins' contract. He was on on the last year of a deal with a $45 million cap hit that had too much dead cap on it to release or trade away. So they had to figure out a way to get that cap hit down. 45 mil wasn't a normal number in 2022. It is now. It wasn't then. And they had to figure that out. And that sort of set them on the quarterback path that they're on now, where they did 2 years of Kirk, and then they decided to try to go into a young quarterback with a bridge guy to compete with. That was Darnold and McCarthy, and that led us to here. And of course, the decision about Darnold and McCarthy, we'll get to that. But the next thing that happened that was major was the 2022 draft, right? There's, of course, free agency, but the 2022 draft is the next major moment in this story, and it's a total disaster. It's a mess. They make this trade down. They trade down with a division rival that takes the player they wanted to take at 12 if the trade didn't happen. That was part of the reporting from Star Tribune, Ben Gessling, that they would have taken Jamison Williams at 12 if they hadn't done it, which is it casts an interesting light on things because they still wouldn't have done Kyle Hamilton, which is, I know, what a lot of people wanted. It's what I wanted at the time. And that shows that there was a problem in scouting. Now, they did replace all the scouts after that offseason, as is typical of a GM. After the draft, you replace the scouts when you're the first, your first year, you kind of go with the staff that's already in progress. And then when the draft is over, you start the new draft with the guys you want. But obviously trading down with Detroit so that they could get the guy isn't looking great now that he's had a couple back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. And of course, Lewis Cine busts out. So the 2022 draft, total disaster, right? And people balk at the lack of experience. That is a through line with all of these articles, that Kwesi comes from a non-football background, and it feels a little bit like there's a lot of people that are like, what gives? This guy isn't part of us. This guy doesn't know our culture. And I started to get a vibe of, if you let a civilian try to be a Marine, like it's like a YouTuber joins the Marines kind of thing, and the Marines are all annoyed. Who is this idiot, right? Like, you're a civilian. You don't understand. You're going to come in and you're going to try to do what we do, but you don't know the culture. You don't know the dynamics. You don't know what it takes. You don't know the dedication. And there are, again, various anecdotes that I'll go over later in the show that show a GM that is overridden at times, that is painted as out of his depth. And he never really overcame the reputation of like an outsider that doesn't know how all this works. He stays in his office too much. He doesn't build relationships. He sells himself as like a quant. That's the word he used, like an accountant. He's just a guy in the office crunching the numbers. but he's not building relationships with his staff enough. That was like a critique from the Wilfs that shows up in all of these articles. He's not, I don't think he's building relationships with other GMs in terms of like trades and all that stuff. Then you get to the QB fiasco of 2025. That is also mentioned every single time, right? And of course, it's super, super top of mind. Sam Darnold's in the Super Bowl. JJ McCarthy looks horrible. Daniel Jones, that whole thing. We'll get to it. The official line for why this happened on the timeline that it did, according to The Athletic, shows them keeping Kwesi initially and then reconvening later, like deciding we're not going to make that change. And then later, like in the last couple of weeks, they all have an impromptu meeting. Impromptu was the word used, changing their minds. This is highly unusual. So now we go into a Rob Brzezinski draft, Rob Brzezinski-led draft. That's probably a lot of the decisions are going to be made by Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores on both of their sides of the ball, with Rob Brzezinski doing the logistics. The rank and file staff and whoever these sources are that are giving this information to journalists. And I will say that typically these journalists will double source these things. So this isn't just coming from like one disgruntled person or anything like that. This will be a sense from multiple people that is consistent across multiple journalists' accounts of the thing. And all these guys don't have the same sources. So this feels like it's pretty universal across the rank and file of the Vikings building that forward-thinking analytics guy that never played, never coached, doesn't understand football, doesn't understand the needs of the position, just never sat well with people. And it got off to a rough start with that first draft, and he just kind of never overcame that reputation. And then every single thing that went wrong, you get an eye roll. Oh my God, the newbie is screwing up again. Rather than the patience may be needed for a guy to learn on the job, which is what I think the vision was supposed to be. You get a guy in, he's going to be new, there's going to be growing pains, but he's going to learn. And there really wasn't space for that, which really feels like it was doomed from the beginning.
Raheem Morris has found another job as defensive coordinator of the San Francisco 49ers. The former Falcons head coach will try to get San Fran's defense back in shape for next season, and Locked On 49ers hosts Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker have more on the hire.
Croc, let's start with this. Raheem Morris, he's the new defensive coordinator of the San Francisco 49ers. We broke down Raheem Morris. We broke down Gus Bradley. We broke down Joe Woods. We broke down Jim Schwartz. And it was pretty clear to us when we left for the weekend that Raheem Morris was probably the most likely and probably the best candidate of the likely candidates for the San Francisco 49ers that had interviewed. So now that Raheem Morris has been reported as the hire as DC for the Niners, what are your thoughts? How do you feel about this coach taking control of the 49ers defense in 2026 and hopefully beyond? And it's not a sixth straight year where the 49ers have a new defensive coordinator next year.
I'm liking it, man. I feel like when I see Raheem Morris, and this isn't to say that he can't be a good head coach, but he feels like a coordinator to me. So the fact that the 49ers got this guy that understands everything that goes into Kyle Shanahan's job. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I think that's one of the big things they talk about. A coordinator needs to understand what it feels like for the head coach so they can help in different ways. And I think he's capable of not only doing that, but how understanding obviously the defensive side of things. I'm curious to see what kind of defense he runs. Understanding the offensive side, because he's worked on the offensive side with Kyle Shanahan. So I think this is a terrific hire for the 49ers, and I think it fits everything that Kyle Shanahan wants in one of his coordinators.
Yep. Kyle gets a guy that he's familiar with. He's really always leaned on familiarity with his coaches. And, by all accounts, a highly respected human being in Raheem Morris, a really good football coach. Here's a quote that it was relayed by our buddy Akash. Sean McVay's quote on Raheem Morris. I believe this quote was from when Raheem was hired as head coach of the Falcons from the Rams staff. Quote on Raheem Morris, this is Sean McVay on Raheem Morris. Quote, he's such a special leader, such a special coach. And when you think about the things that a great head coach does, has command over the game, command over a room, the ability to connect with a bunch of different people, Raheem does all of that. And he's got that head coach experience, still a young coach, only 49 years old, and brings a ton of experience as a defensive coach, a defensive back coach, a former player at Hofstra, I believe, right, where he was a defensive back and then a graduate assistant coach there later. He's a former college safety. coached defensive backs in the NFL, has called plays as a defensive coordinator, assistant head coach, and been a head coach in the league. So he's worn a lot of hats. He's even been an offensive coach as part of staff with Kyle Shanahan, coaching wide receivers as well. So he's even coached on that side of the football. So really great resume for Raheem Morris, and I think potentially a home run hire for the San Francisco 49ers. The reason I think the timing was Sunday that it was announced is because all the head coach vacancies had been filled, and Raheem Morris was a finalist for the Arizona Cardinals job. And the Cardinals went with Matt LaFleur's little brother, Mike LaFleur, former 49ers assistant coach. Mike LaFleur is now going to be the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. It looks like Klint Kubiak looks like he, after the Super Bowl, is going to go to the Raiders. So once those two dominoes fell, that meant that there were no head coach jobs left. And Raheem Morris said, okay, I'm not going to be a head coach this cycle. I can be a defensive coordinator now and go join my buddy Kyle in San Francisco with the 49ers. One more quick note here, Croc, on Jim Schwartz. This relayed from ESPN's Nick Wagner. The 49ers were interested, just as many teams were, about potentially interviewing and hiring Jim Schwartz as defensive coordinator, but didn't get the sense from anyone that he'd shake loose from Cleveland. Too much uncertainty there to ignore a strong, well-liked candidate that is available now. So the 49ers weren't going to wait around. They liked their guy, and they were just going to go get Raheem Morris and not going to wait and see what the heck was going on with Jim Schwartz. So there you go. Raheem Morris, defense coordinator of the San Francisco 49ers. I love it, Croc. I think it's a great hire.
In this, does it feel like there's a little nepotism going on, just a little bit, with the LaFleurs? And
there's an insane amount of it's the nepotism football league. That's what the NFL stands for. It's crazy, dude. The other day, like the one that put me over the top, because clearly, Kubiak's and it looks Shanahan is guilty of this as well. Like, the biggest step you can take is that first job. Kyle Shanahan rolled out of bed the day after he graduated college and got to be in John Gruden's staff as a quality control coach, like immediately, right? And then you get all these guys that their resumes start to look awesome when they're 30 because they started coaching in the NFL, when they're still wet behind the ears. And so they do end up being, a lot of them, good coaches and have great resumes, but they get, that jump start in life and buddies hiring their buddies and doing family favors for other families. And it is pretty crazy. The one that got me, though, last week, Croc, was there was a report. It was like Charlie Weiss Jr. might leave Lane Kiffin's staff to join, I don't remember which coach it was, maybe Kubiak's staff in the NFL if he gets hired. And it's like, oh, okay. It's like the ultimate nepotism tweet. Why am I not shocked that Charlie Weiss Jr. is a coach and a candidate to get a really good job on another Nepo baby staff in Lane Kiffin and potentially joining another Nepo baby staff in the NFL? I don't know. It's just the nepotism is insane in the NFL. Right.
And there's another one. I saw this. So JT O'Sullivan, obviously he runs the QB school.
Yeah.
He has talked a lot about.
He's on a rampage about the Nepo in the league. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I've seen the tweets and I'm looking at one right now. The Bengals are hiring Davis Coder, son, and I could be saying that name wrong, but I'm assuming Coder, Koetter, son of former NFL coach Dirk Koetter, as their assistant wide receivers coach per source. Coder had been at Texas Tech for a couple of years and whatnot. So you just see guys are getting their shots, they're getting their opportunities, and I mean that's cool, But I probably would hire. I would hire my buddies. I'm sure.
Yeah, your buddies.
It just ends up being kind of this thing, and people, but then people understand, or excuse me, they get confused. Like, oh, why are there the same names? Like, just keep going and going and going. And it's like, man, once you're in, it's just a whole little cycle going on.
Yeah, once you're in, you're in. I think the worst one in this last year was Pete Carroll in Las Vegas hiring his son Brendan Carroll as the O-line coach, and the O-line was garbage. It was like legitimately a bad football coach might have got his dad fired because of how bad they were up front. And it's pretty wild out there. But Raheem Morris, new defensive coordinator for the 49ers. I really like it for the San Francisco 49ers. Brings some stability to the job. I bet he gets a head coach interview next year, Croc. And so, the hope is that maybe he can hang around for a while and not get hired away after one season like Robert Saleh did in this cycle. And now the question is, does Gus Bradley stick around? Like, could the 49ers potentially, because the three defense coordinators they interviewed, Croc, was Gus Bradley, Joe Woods, and Raheem Morris. Could they end up with all three and hire Joe Woods as defensive back coach and keep Gus Bradley in the same role as assistant head coach and end up with all three of those guys potentially? I don't think it's very likely. I think there's a good chance Gus Bradley might actually go over with Robert Saleh and be the defensive coordinator there, even though Saleh is going to call the plays or potentially join Mike LaFleur's staff in
I was going to say, did Saleh not learn his lesson?
Yeah, well, so we've got some questions on that. I want to talk about that next, Raheem Morris, about some of the comments we had made in the past of watching Raheem Morris blank stare on the sideline, watching his team lose a football game.
It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff. The final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season is officially coming to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
Welcome back to the Big 6 and 60. The Knicks hosted the Lakers last night and got a win behind OG Anunoby's 25 points. Locked On Knicks host Gavin Shaw recaps the victory.
Only one place we can start, and I think that is the Knicks' collective commitment to pace. And to me, that does not just mean offensive pace. Yes, they are consistently running off of rebounds. You're seeing the impact a fully healthy Josh Hart can have, consistently turning plays that should not be transition into layups, into pushes that cause transition mismatches that eventually lead to buckets. You are seeing pace in the half court for the New York Knicks in the way they're defending off the ball, and Mikal Bridges just repeatedly like hedging and helping Jalen Brunson out of a mismatch, then recovering. You're seeing flow where Karl Anthony Towns is tagging and then stepping up and then sliding his feet on a switch. You're seeing guys falling down. I mean, Cat's a good example of this. I'll expand on it more later. And then sprinting back for a rebound on the other end of the floor. I talked about this a lot with XJ the other day, but it feels like this team, and it's something we noted even when they were losing 9 out of 11, it wasn't that they were playing hard and still losing. It wasn't that they were executing and still losing. It was that they had totally abandoned the way Mike Brown wanted to play. And my bigger concern about Mike Brown and my bigger concern about this team was less so the tactics. Yes, the lineup deployment was less than ideal, but that ultimately wasn't the biggest issue. The biggest issue was that this team did not want to lean into the things that made them great early in the season, and they are committed to an even greater extent than they were earlier in the year. I mean, this is the best defense they played for an extended stretch. You have to go. Maybe I'm forgetting some time last season, and you can remind me in the comments if I am. But to the best of my knowledge, this is the best defense they played since the first month when they traded for OG Anunoby, and they were one of the best defenses in the entire NBA. And then certainly like in the playoffs with that combination of Isaiah Hartenstein and OG Anunoby. But since 23-24, they haven't defended like this, and it is not really one guy. Yes, OG has stepped up and elevated on that end. Yes, like I think Mikal has remained just a fulcrum defensively, like doing the quiet stuff consistently and nailing it. But just across the board, like Jalen Brunson is someone who's putting in second and third efforts in a way you just were not seeing when they were struggling. And to me, to bring this full circle, it is so much about Landry Shamet back and being fully healthy. Yes, this team was embarrassed. Yes, this team clearly, like after it took until the fourth players only meeting, they clearly made a commitment to buy in a different way than they were previously. But I think going from Jordan Clarkson, who, to be fair, should not be the scapegoat for all this, right? On a more functional team with a slightly different roster, Clarkson maybe would have been a really positive contributor this year. And at times he was a really positive contributor, like single-handedly helped drag them to that win over Cleveland on Christmas Day. He's done some great stuff this year. And the Knicks are one injury away from needing him to play well again. But on this team, I think it was a backbreaker to have someone like Jordan Clarkson as an essential piece off your bench, right? One of the worst defenders in the NBA, just not efficient enough or high volume enough on this roster to justify it with the talent that he brings to the table offensively. And you switch that out for someone like Landry Shamet. I am just going to run off a list of all the things Landry Shamet is bringing to the table right now. Shooting, obviously. He is someone who we always talked about on the show as like he's a good shooter. You can't really expect like Dante DiVincenzo, top 5, top 10 in the league shooting. And he's not there, but he's close this year. He's 43.5% from 3, 5 threes per game in just 20.5 minutes per game. You expand those minutes, you expand those numbers to per 36. Like his shooting becomes just ridiculous. That is a little bit of an outlier relative to his career norms, which is more like high 30s. We'll see if it keeps it up. But I mean, right now, not showing any signs of faltering there. So you get elite, like A to A+ shooting. You get legitimate secondary ball handling, and not in that like he is going to ISO and like create a shot out of thin air, more so in his ability when an advantage is created for him, he can attack a closeout and make the next pass and relocate and hit a 3. Like he keeps the machine moving in the same way Dante did. And that makes him such a good fit playing off of Jalen Brunson. Right? For those of you, again, the lineup data doesn't really reflect this, but those of you arguing like, hey, if you don't want to start Deuce because he's quote unquote too small, start Landry. Like I'm starting to buy into that being able to work. We have to see how it would look consistently with Landry going against starters versus going against bench guys. But his ability to play out of Jalen Brunson drawing extra attention, Cat drawing extra attention, like whoever it is, like Hart occasionally drawing extra attention, and make defenses pay, whether it's with his shooting, whether it's his shooting inspiring a hard closeout, and then his ability to toast that closeout and scramble the defense further. Like he plays out of advantages exceptionally well and takes small advantages and turns them into big advantages. And that is invaluable. And that is in contrast to Clarkson, who I don't want to say never did that, but was certainly someone who preferred to slow it down, as Will Hardy put it, like play his own song relative to the rest of the team at times. That is so incredibly additive. And then you add in like the screen navigation on defense, the energy plays, right? The offensive rebounds he either gets to or bats out, the diving on the floor for loose balls. Like just like there is an infectious positivity both to his personality and just his skill set, frankly, that I think this team needed. Like sometimes this stuff, and let me know what you think in the comments, because some of you have been watching basketball longer than I've been alive, but I genuinely believe there is a tipping point with certain teams in terms of good vibes versus bad vibes. And like one more guy who's just not playing super hard, not hustling, one more guy who you know is just not going to be able to hold his own in his matchup. And it is not only the points that guy directly gives up, it is the stress that creates across the board. It is, I mean, we see it with Brunson, and it happened in this game, and I'll talk about the early help that player has to get. And in turn, like the buckets that get given up because of that. It is the resentment across the board that fosters, whether it is a bad shot offensively or even if you're trying defensively, just getting absolutely abused on that end. And when you switch a guy who has some of that to a guy who can hold his own and is just supportive across the board on offense, it elevates the vibes. It elevates the energy of the team in such a way. And then when you get your stars like Brunson and Cat, who have not been playing super duper well offensively and have not been shooting the ball super well, saying, okay, I'm going to do everything else. I'm going to crash. I'm going to make an extra pass. I'm going to draw help and set you up for an easy layup. Like it is absolutely infectious across the board. And as this team wins its 6th straight game, as this team is playing like about as well as any team in the NBA right now, like I think you see the downstream effect of what Landry Shamet is bringing, and also just a collective decision to say enough is enough. Like we're all well paid. Expectations are rightfully extremely high. We got to the Eastern Conference Finals despite not really being optimized, just off of to some extent, I mean, Jalen Brunson being amazing, but also pure pride, pure grit. That is still in there. But if you don't buy in, if you don't start building those habits, this is a Tom Thibodeau culture builder 101. Like, you are going to falter and you're going to get punched in the mouth and you're going to get embarrassed in round one. But it might not even get to that point, because as we approach the trade deadline and those Giannis rumors get louder and louder and louder, I think there was a realization in this locker room. If you don't put it together now, this isn't going to be the team. And for a couple guys, Mikal, Cat, you might not get a chance to do this in New York and on the Knicks again. And you might be shipped off to a Milwaukee or a Portland, good franchises, good cities, but not places where you're going to win a championship in the near future. And I think that has lodged in these guys' heads, and they made a collective decision. They could have given up. They could have said, screw it. F everyone. I'm not happy with this team. I'm not happy with the direction of this group. I'm done. And instead they bought in. And we are seeing the effect of that. And this team, frankly, they look like a title contender right now. Yes, they're going to need Cat to turn it around and shoot better and drive better. They're going to need, not that there's any doubt about this, but they're going to need Jalen to score the ball like Jalen. Like, a bunch of stuff still has to click in. And then they probably still need to find a way to make a deadline move that I don't know if they necessarily have the assets to make right now. But this team is starting to look how they are supposed to look. And this was a hell of a win for the New York Knicks.
It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff. The final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season is officially coming to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
Welcome back to the Big 6 and 60. Illinois basketball had an impressive week this week, with wins over number 12 Purdue and then number 5 Nebraska Sunday afternoon. Locked On Illini host Sonny Verma has more on a big week.
For the first time in a very long time, Keaton Wagler stunk for 20 minutes. I think it's safe to say in that first half today, Keaton Wagler shot 2 of 9 for only 5 points. He had 3 assists and a turnover, playing 18 minutes. And maybe for a split second, the idea that, Keaton Wagler's high school basketball team was all there. I think a lot of his friends and family were in attendance that game. And maybe Keaton was just trying to do too much. He was not a good player in that first half. But again, Illinois was only down 6 at half. All of this combines into a similar storyline, if you're catching my drift. Keaton, despite not having a good first half, then all of a sudden, Keaton Wagler shows up in the second half. In the second half, he scored 23 points, made 5 of 6 from the field, 3 of 4 from three-point land, 10 of 12 from the free throw line. Again, he played the entire second half, 20 minutes. And Keaton saw something today that he hasn't seen in the past, and that he's going to see a lot more moving forward. And certainly next Saturday, teams are going to try to beat Keaton up. And I thought that maybe they were getting in his head in that first half. They did as good of a defensive job as I've seen anybody do against Keaton Wagler this season. Nebraska did in that first half. But they were hitting him. They're very physical with him. There was a hook and hold that wasn't called. That one call, I know you guys know what I'm talking about, wasn't upgraded to a flagrant foul for whatever odd reason. And when you look at Keaton, right, he looks like he's 150 pounds soaking wet. And Nebraska had a game plan that maybe they can get in his head and really make him second guess wanting to come into the paint. Because these fouls, they weren't just fouls. They were, I'm trying to send you a message type of fouls. And Keaton, again, in the first half, didn't play all that well. But in the second half, he just, the Keaton Wagler that we know showed up. And now that you see like his ultimate game line, he finished with 28 points on 7 of 15 shooting in 37 minutes. And you know what? The best part of Keaton's game today, well, it was his offense in the second half, certainly. but his defense in that second half, he's growing at that area as well. The thought just came to my mind, so I feel like I have to address it. If you guys haven't talked about it in the comment section, please do. At one point, Brad Underwood trotted out a lineup that had Keaton Wagler as your point guard, Andrei Stojakovic as your 2, 6'7", 6'9" David Mirkovic as your 3, then 7'1" Tomislav Ivisic as your 4, and Big Zavonimir 7'2" as your center. There's maybe 2 other teams in the country that can match that type of size. You know how we were concerned about when Kylan Boswell went out that, hey, we only have 1 point guard now? We've learned essentially over the past week that that's simply not the case. Brad Underwood has built this team the way he's been envisioning it for years. And just now, this year's team, it's got the right personnel for it. That monster lineup that played together not only kept the Illini in it, but they actually made a run themselves. That monster lineup where 6'6" Keaton Wagler was the shortest guy on the court. There was 5 point guards on the floor at that time. They put Z in the dunker spot. You had David dribbling it up court at some point, giving Keaton Wagler a break. Like, that's the type of stuff that they put on tape. Like, what's Michigan State going to do against that? You know, a lot of Fred Hoiberg talked about it in the post-game press conference. I never get to watch these post-game press conferences because I go live immediately after the game. But I got to watch Brad. I got to watch Fred Hoiberg. Fred acknowledged it. He said, like, yeah, this lineup that Illinois put up was just, it's extremely difficult to guard. And that just teases you a little bit about what else does Brad Underwood have up his sleeve with this basketball team. Because again, David's a great passer. And he's a great decision maker. Tomislav Ivisic, we saw it last year. Arguably, our offense was at its peak last year when Tommy was essentially running the point from the high post. Pick and rolls with Will Riley. And between Tommy and David, you have 3 playmakers on the court when you already have Keaton Wagler. And Keaton doesn't need to have all the pressure of doing everything himself like it looked like he had in that first half. But that just... Again, today, if anything, has sent a message to the rest of the Big Ten. Nebraska was favored in today's game. I don't think Illinois is going to be an underdog in any game remaining on their schedule. And I don't think I'm being too brass when I say that. Michigan State, Breslin Center, next Saturday. It's not going to be an easy game. And quite honestly, those of you who've watched Big Ten basketball for a while, you know that what we saw from Nebraska today when it comes to the physicality, it's going to be 10x that against Michigan State. If there's one thing I'm worried about, and again, you don't have to remind me. I know we play Northwestern, I believe, on Wednesday or Thursday. So the team's not looking ahead, okay? But Michigan State, if there's one thing I'm really afraid of, and you know what Tom Izzo has been coaching for 25 plus years, they're going to take their cheap shots. They're going to be tripping guys up. If they think the ref is not looking, they're going to try to hurt these players. And the game is at Breslin, where Tom Izzo gets in the head of some of these referees. And that is, quite honestly, a concern of mine. But that's why I'm so grateful that Illinois got a glimpse of that today. Keaton Wagler was hammered today over and over again. David Mirkovic was pushed in the back over and over again every time he was going out for rebounds. Michigan State's going to do that. You know why? Because they have to. Michigan State is not as good talent-wise or skill-wise as the Illini are. So they've got to even up the game somewhere. You thought Mackey was loud? You thought the Pinnacle Bank Arena today was loud? Breslin Center is going to be just as loud. And Michigan State's going to do what they tend to do. They're going to turn everything into a wrestling match. And it's going to be up to Illinois to not back down from it. And again, I think you saw a glimpse of it today, and you have to feel more confident. I've watched the Illini for so long, and we've all collectively been waiting for that other shoe to drop. This team has now won 11 in a row since that loss to Nebraska in December. If this team wins out, I would not be surprised. Should they? No. I'm sure there's no team's going to go, 18-1 in the conference. Like, that's not going to happen. Or is it? Is it out of the realm of possibility with this basketball team? Every week they show you something that should alleviate you of your concerns from previous year's teams. Brad Underwood is doing as masterful of a coaching job as he ever has. And I know Fred Hoiberg's going to get all the mention about being coach of the year in the Big Ten Conference, maybe national coach of the year, and I understand it. And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it. But if there's any year, if the Illini can go, 18-2 in the Big Ten and win the Big Ten Conference, where 5 of the country's top 10 teams all reside, with a freshman leading the team, you don't think Brad Underwood's going to get some mention? They absolutely will. What if they get a number 1 seed? We talked about this before. Again, they're only playing 7 guys at this point. But Brad's always had an idea, and you can credit Tyler Underwood too, about a certain vision for a basketball team. And now we're seeing that vision play out. And it just so happens, like last year, the 3-point shooters weren't 3-point shooting. And the guy who was the engine of the offense just turned the ball over more than the average Illini fan would like. And quite honestly, the coaching staff would like. But this year, that's not the problem. You have the prototypical perfect. You have a 6'6" point guard who doesn't get faced, who doesn't turn the ball over, and who can shoot. That's literally that's the player that Brad Underwood would build in a lab. And that player was ranked in the 250s when it comes to recruits. I'm going to say it again. If any of you complain in the comment section about Illinois getting a 3-star and saying they should be going after 5 stars, at this point, you're being silly. You got to trust the evaluation of this coaching staff.
Welcome back to the Big 6 and 60. The Florida Gators dominated Alabama on the hardwood yesterday and is starting to look more like the team that won the national championship last season. Locked On Gators host Brandon Olson recaps the blowout.
Kansas takes down BYU. It was a very interesting game, obviously, because it was one that, Kansas could have won by seemingly 20 points. Like for a while there, it felt like kind of similar to the, I guess it was the Houston game 2 years ago in the Fieldhouse, where Kansas just like rolled through a really good Houston team, or the Baylor game from the year that Kansas won the title in 2022, where Baylor was ended up being a 1 seed that year, and Kansas just destroyed them at home. Kind of had that feel through the first half of the game, and then obviously we know what happened at the final 8-9 minutes of the game that led to it being closer than you would want or than you would expect to, right? But in the end, this wound up being KU's 3rd most efficient game of the season by points per possession, and it wound up being their most efficient against I guess you would say a good opponent or top 50 opponent. The other 2 games were Green Bay and Kansas State, right? So this was KU's basically best offensive game of the season, if you're taking into account, the opponent and everything. But it was KU's 3rd best turnover rate offensive game. It was their 5th best 2-point percentage game. It was their 2nd best 3-point percentage game. And you total it all up, it was their best effective field goal percentage game, leading to it being their 3rd most efficient game when you put everything together, right? And that's what this kind of comes down to me. Like, this was an elite offensive shooting performance from Kansas, an execution game from KU. And it's not always going to be that way for this team, but it was nice to see that was in there. And, at the end of it, Kansas allowed 1.184 points per possession. What the heck does that number mean? Every other game this season that Kansas has given up a mark of 1.16, again, it was 1.184, 1.16 higher than that mark have been losses. UCF, loss. Duke, loss. North Carolina, blown out loss. West Virginia, double-digit loss on the road. The TCU game was actually at that mark, 1.16, and you probably should have lost the game, but you had a miracle comeback. But this was a game that, instead of like those where either you're losing or having a miracle comeback, you led the game for 37 minutes and change because the offense was that good. The shooting, the execution was that good for Kansas. And yes, again, you can't expect to shoot like that every game. You can't expect to have that good of an offense every game. But for a team that we know has been to this point kind of more about, the defense than the offense, and especially when Darren Peterson's not been on the court, to see that ability inside of them was really nice to see that they have that potential to do this, right? And how it kind of came together became really important too, right? Bryson Tiller was phenomenal for KU. I mean, he looked like a pro. We had our conversation with Bryce Simon. Check that out if you missed it, where we kind of broke down A.J. DeBonta versus Darren Peterson. And we also, in the third segment of that show, kind of talked about other Jayhawks on the team, of their future or current, potential draft prospects, so to speak, right? And we talked a little bit about Flory Badunga, and we talked about, some of these guys. And one of the guys that we touched on was Bryson Tiller. And, we kind of got into the idea that, like, Bryce Simon, who, again, does excellent draft work, is good as anybody, like, talked about that he thinks he's going to see him popping up potentially as, like, a first-round pick in 2027 mock drafts. And you see this game, and obviously there's all these NBA scouts in attendance to watch Peterson and DeBonta, and you're just like, what if a team is like, hey, I think you might be popping up on 2027 mock drafts, so hey, if you want to enter in the 2026 draft, we'll take you in the late second round. Now, for Tiller, obviously, then it becomes a conversation of like, okay, what NIL money am I giving? But I'll put it this way. That game probably earned Bryson Tiller, I don't know, an extra little chunk of his potential NIL deal in the 2026 to 2027 season. But, like, it was such a show because I think throughout this season we've seen it from Tiller. Like, the question has always been the consistency, which makes sense for a redshirt freshman big man, right? There's been ups, there's been downs and stuff, and that'll be the question, can you have another up in the Texas Tech game coming up next? But we've seen the high potential that makes everybody think, right? We've all heard the Morris twins comparison, right? That makes you think that next season could be something special. And seeing some of the moments along the way this year are what give you those glimpses into the future. But it was also super important to win this game, and in this moment, he was so good, man. And when Bryson Tiller is super aggressive on the offensive end, that is when KU is really lethal, because it does change what they can be offensively, as you saw when Tiller is scoring at a high level, which he obviously has the potential to do. Now, beyond that, Darren Peterson in the first half, I mean, it looked like that was going to be the story of the game, that Darren Peterson was locked in, engaged, ready to take down A.J. DeBonta, and obviously with the second half stuff, it ended up not being as much, to me, where Tiller became kind of the big storyline here. But, like, Peterson outscored A.J. DeBonta, and he didn't even play basically in the second half. He was so good when he was in the game. I mean, the level of shot making and shot creation, and even the one assist he had was like incredible, because he had like a steal before it, and then he's like doing different things with the ball and like weaving through traffic. And I don't know, it was just a super impressive offensive performance where it looked like a guy who was an NBA player that got dropped onto the Kansas roster. That was so freaking incredible. And the whole idea to me of like A.J. DeBonta is still a good player. I don't think he had a very good game, but he's still a good player. But the whole idea of drafting A.J. DeBonta, in the top 3, I think comes with a level of projection, a level of potential, a level of, hey, this dude's a really good athlete and he's 6'9". Whereas the Darren Peterson, yeah, of course there's more potential there, but like you kind of like, I don't know. I guess with DeBonta, you feel like, okay, this is a freshman playing who is raw, but he's very talented and skilled. With Peterson, you almost get the sense when you're watching him out there of like, no, this dude looks like a pro right now, And it was just really cool to kind of see that. And obviously the dunk was really fun too. Then I would say some of the other biggest positives in this one for KU, like the defense on DeBonta was very good for KU. Like I thought it was interesting that KU at different points threw different guys on him to try to give him different looks so he didn't get comfortable at any point in time. It was Flory for the majority of the time, I would say, and it was Flory to start the game. I think there were a few moments where it switched to be like Peterson. There was even a few moments where it was Jamari McDowell, and those were moments that I was a little worried on that he was going to be able to outsize him, but I think McDowell actually held his own. And then there were even, obviously, El Marco missed most of the second half with the injury too. There were moments where El Marco Jackson was guarding him, and I thought El Marco did a good job on him, being able to use his kind of speed and athleticism to stay in front of him. But I think for the most part, like Flory deserves a tip of the cap, so to speak, to, with how he guarded him. And specifically, like, okay, the big worry with putting Flory on DeBonta is a foul magnet, right? He does a very good job of drawing fouls on people. And Flory, like that would be a big question with putting Flory on him, because Flory's had games where sometimes he's, gotten in foul trouble. And if you're missing Flory in a game like this, that really hurts you, right? So for Flory to play that well defensively without, picking up fouls was gigantic. And I think Bill Self mentioned in the postgame that like this was a big opportunity for him. A bunch of NBA scouts out there. Now they can see how versatile he is on defense. Good for Flory, man. Good for Flory. And in that same conversation with Bryce Simon, we were talking about he was kind of leaning that maybe Flory would be like more of a 2027 prospect than 26, because if he's a second rounder, maybe it makes more sense to make more NIL money. Well, maybe that changed with this game against BYU. Some of the biggest negatives, just to quickly touch on, I mean, the end of game offense was not good. They went from like 8 and change to like 1 and change until Council hit that jumper without making a field goal. So that was not great for KU. Obviously, the Darren Peterson and Marco Jackson injuries that kept them out of the second half, that was not great. That's just kind of been, I don't know, the story this year for Darren Peterson, and it sounded like in postgame it was cramps, so I guess I'm expecting him to play against Texas Tech, but obviously, that continues to be kind of a thing this year. With Marco, that one a little scary because he had the patellar injury a season ago, and we'll wait and see what happens there. But like, I do think obviously the Darren Peterson one coincides with not making shots for the final, or for that like 7-minute stretch down the end of the game. I do think not having Marco hurt Kansas more than you might think, because Marco has been a good defender this year. It seems like there's like one play a game where Marco gets beat on like a drive or something, or maybe, gives up an and one or something. But for the most part, Marco has been a good defender in his KU career. And I can't help but wonder if not having another good defender guard out there would have helped you prevent Richie Saunders from just going inferno mode in the second half. But I don't know. And then rebounding, that was not a good rebounding game again for KU. That was KU's worst offensive rebound rate game of the season. And obviously BYU had like 12 offensive rebounds as well. But bottom line here is this, like, you got to see an awesome first half performance from Darren Peterson. You saw a really good defensive performance on AJ DeBonsa, even though it wasn't overall a great defensive performance, mostly because of Richie Saunders. But you got to see Bryson Tiller, you got to see Flory Badunga. The front line for KU wound up being huge in this one. And in the end, you got a solid victory over a good opponent. That's a resume boosting win. It keeps kind of the momentum going, and it was nice to see the offense for KU play a gigantic role in them winning one of these big games.
That's all for today's Big 6 in 60. If you follow basketball, football, or college sports, the Big 3 in 30 has a half hour on the biggest news in the NFL, the NBA, or on campus going up every weekend, just like we do here. Just search the Big 3 in 30 NBA, the Big 3 in 30 NFL, or the Big 3 in 30 college, wherever you're listening or watching now. Thanks again for tuning in to the Big 6 in 60.